Hello everyone, today I will be reviewing Barry Lyndon. So Barry Lyndon came out in 1975 and was directed by Stanley Kubrick, and this is a period drama based on a novel, The Luck of Barry Lyndon by William Makepeace Thackeray. And this film is set in the 18th century and it focuses around this Irishman who is named Redmond Barry, played by Ryan O'Neal. So right at the start of this film, Redmond Barry, he becomes infatuated with his cousin Nora, but unfortunately for him, Nora is interested in this British Army captain called John Quinn, and they end up wanting to marry each other. Redmond Barry, he's obviously not very happy about this, and he challenges John Quinn to a duel. Redmond Barry ends up winning the duel, and thinking that John Quinn has died and now Redmond Barry is going to be in trouble, he ends up going on the run. And we essentially follow Redmond Barry through the journey of this film as he ends up involved in lots of different events and lots of interesting things end up happening to him. He ends up serving in the British Army himself. He ends up becoming a servant, and he also ends up marrying a rich widow in order to climb up the social ladder. I have to say though, having watched this film for the first time, I did think that the narrative itself is actually fairly straightforward. It's a fairly easy film to follow, and the reason for that is that the pacing of the film is very slow and it really takes its time with the storytelling. The film is over 3 hours long, or just over 3 hours long, and although that may put some people off, I found the story itself to be very interesting and very compelling. As I said, this was the first time I'd seen this, and Stanley Kubrick, actually one of my favourite film directors of all time, so I was really looking forward to seeing this. And this film is really proper Stanley Kubrick. It really feels like a Stanley Kubrick film, and the reason for this is just the way that it is shot. So like I said, it's very slow paced. A lot of the camera shots, the shots often linger for a bit longer than expected, particularly if you're used to watching more modern films. You may think, why is the camera staying on this area when it doesn't need to? But the reason for that is that this film is so beautiful to look at. It's absolutely stunning, and in fact a lot of this film was actually filmed using natural light. We get quite a lot of shots which are only lit by candlelight, as it was in the 18th century during this time, and this film has a real period look to it, a real period piece look to it. It really suits the time period very well. It has that real painting-like look to it. In fact, a lot of the shots of this film, they are very artistic looking. They almost look like those old Renaissance paintings that you would see. They're just absolutely marvellous to look at, and this is one of the most stunning looking films I've ever seen. Now, in terms of the acting, like a lot of Kubrick films, the acting is quite unemotional and almost cold-like, but I don't necessarily mean that in a bad way. So if you've seen any of other Kubrick's films like A Clockwork Orange or Full Metal Jacket or The Shining, you will know that a lot of the characters in the film, they don't always have the most interesting personalities. They're always characters where things just happen to them and they end up getting involved in events. And it is exactly the same with Redmond Barry in this film. Now Redmond Barry, he later becomes Barry Lyndon, if you're slightly confused by the title. So Barry Lyndon as a character, perhaps Ryan O'Neal sort of plays him as quite an unemotional character. He may not be the most interesting personality. He never really seems to get really happy or really sad about anything, and all of the things that happen to him throughout this film, there tend to be quite a lot of big events that happen and he doesn't really react to them. Nevertheless, the film really works because of this, and Stanley Kubrick has this way of directing which essentially makes films like this absolutely superb to watch. I must also mention the music in this film. It's absolutely beautiful. Throughout this film, most of the time there does seem to be some classical piece of music playing in the background, particularly with the opening sequence and later towards the end, and it always seems to suit a scene very well. There's lots of tension building in this film. We get some scenes where perhaps a duel is about to take place or something dark and evil is about to happen, and there's always lots of build up to the scene. Some people might find that a little bit impatient and might think, hurry up with it already, but I have to say I really appreciated it more with the greater build-up and the use of suspense and the music, and it really works in many scenes throughout this film, particularly because the characters themselves are all very interesting. I really got to care about quite a lot of these characters. The interesting thing is that Barry Lyndon's a character. He's not necessarily either a good guy or a bad guy. He's just a character that things end up happening to, because a lot of the things he does in this film perhaps aren't particularly noble, but at the same time a lot of the things he does aren't particularly evil either. He's just one of those characters who ends up involved in lots of these events. One of the more interesting things is the relationship between Barry Lyndon and his son, and also the relationship between Barry Lyndon and his wife's son, or his stepson I suppose. Towards the end of the film, things really get very interesting there, and we get some really interesting exchanges of dialogue and some really interesting scenes. I must also say this film is actually in two parts. There's part one where it leads up to Redmond Barry becoming Barry Lyndon, and then part two at the end. I have to say I think part two is a bit sadder, a bit darker perhaps, whereas part one does tend to have a few more light-hearted moments dotted throughout it. So overall I have to say Barry Lyndon was a film I certainly enjoyed very much, even though it is a very long film and very slow paced. I thought it's a fantastic looking film. The story really gripped me. I really thought the story was excellent. It's a beautiful looking film, beautiful music. If I had to say some downsides about it, I'd say it is a little bit on the long side. I know I did say that I didn't mind that, but yes, there are a few scenes which perhaps drag on a little bit, but it was what I expected from a Stanley Kubrick film, and I think it's a shame that Stanley Kubrick didn't do more epic films like this. Obviously he did Spartacus and 2001: A Space Odyssey, but really most of his films after this, they were certainly not on the same scale as this one. So it's a very ambitious film, and overall I think it worked very well. I think this is one of those films that people have gone back to reevaluate and now regard as a classic, even though when it came out it didn't do very well at the box office and did have mixed reviews. So I'm going to give Barry Lyndon a rating of 9 out of 10. I highly recommend it, especially if you enjoy other Stanley Kubrick films. You will know exactly what to expect. And if you enjoy period dramas, I would say definitely give this a chance as well. So there we go. So that is my review of Barry Lyndon. So what do you guys think? Have you seen Barry Lyndon? Do you like it? Do you dislike it? Please let me know what your thoughts are down in the comment section below. Anyway, thank you very much for watching. I'll see you all in the next video. Take care.